I did a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation because I wanted to be able to share some ideas with you. And of course, it's all in the Valentine theme. And if anyone knows me, they know that I'm all over the place. I'm doing all kinds of crafts, and I've been doing it for the last 40, 50 years. So I just put together some ideas, and I thought that I would be able to share them with you tonight. So I'm hoping that as we go along, we can stop and talk and chat, and feel free to send a message. As I said, I was asked to do a presentation on some creative ideas and things that I thought I would share with you. I do a lot of crafts and a lot of things that I try and share, and I teach, and I get involved with different things. So ideas that I put together were to share with everyone, and I wanted to tell you about working with acrylics. So this was the one that I put together as a workshop for beginners in acrylics. And if you've never painted before, it's a very easy workshop. Takes about an hour and a half to do. And everybody comes together. The supplies can be low end or high end, depending on what you want to do. If you fall in love with acrylic painting, then you should invest in good materials. And there's certain standard of quality of materials. But if you want to just play like a paint night, then you can go lower end materials. Most of everything that I use for my classes, students can pick up through the dollar store or Michael's or anything like that. So this is the Valentine Hearts program. And first things you do is gather your supplies. So you'd get a canvas, any size you want, and some brushes. I use the paints red, pink, blue, yellow, and white. And then, so you can see in this screen here, I painted the background blue, and I drew the hearts on and then painted the background. And just rough paint. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything. As long as you're covering the grid on the canvas, it should be thick enough to do that so that you don't have any weak spots in your canvas. The canvases that you buy are supposed to be pre-gessoed. So if you were doing a professional painting, you would re-gesso everything so that you wouldn't have any gaps in the gesso. So that the gesso seals the tooth of the canvas so your paint doesn't sink into it. But for this purpose, you just put lots of paint on and make sure your canvas doesn't show through with your paint. So you can do that. And as I said, you start by painting the background. And then the next thing I did is start to draw the hearts, paint the background, and then I started painting the hearts from the center out with a red. And then when you're done, you just pick your colors that you want that go together, So I did red, yellow, and then I did a blue and the red, giving me a purple color, then some more red, then some more yellow, until I got out to the edge. And then I painted the baby heart in similar colors. So that way it was, you could get the whole thing. So when that is done, that becomes your painting. And you can go back in and cover up any spots, change the colors. Acrylic colors are very forgiving. You could paint white over a red and it would disappear, and then you repaint it with the red. So you can layer your acrylic, so there is no way to make a mistake. You just paint over it and repaint it, and it dries fairly quickly. And so you're able to make corrections as you go. Pardon me. So the other is that if you feel comfortable using the acrylics, you can always do another workshop and try some landscapes. So I paint landscapes, mostly trees. I like nature, so trees, they're easy and they're forgiving. You're not straight lines. You can make as wiggly as you want or as frail as you want. So to do that, you can just grab a canvas, some brushes, and paint, and this with some tape. So this is a cheater for the tape, that I use. I'm masking out with tape on the trees. So what I did is I painted the trees. You see the green tape?
Yep.
I painted that with the, and then I put the tape down in the shape of the trees, the location of the trees that I wanted. And then I went back in and I painted the sky and I turned it upside down and painted the sky, and then I turned it the other way and painted the grasses. When they were dry, I took the tape off,
Oh,
right? And then so if you look at the final one over here, the last picture, you'll see that what we're doing is we've got the grasses in, we've got the white for the trees. Now you start filling in some leaves and some bark and some background trees, make them more distinct, put some sticks in there, some branches, things like that. And you have a painting. You can fill in as much detail as you want until you're happy with the painting and you get what you want. You can paint this a dozen times and it'll be different every time. Depending on the colors that you put in those white trees, you could put any color in the tree. You can put red, pink, blue, shades of anything you want. But basically, there's supposed to be a birch tree, and you put shadows on anything you want. And if you don't like it, you just paint over it and repaint it because, as I said, acrylics are very forgiving. So if I can go back one, you can see the background details of the finished one. I've got sticks in the background and branches and trees and leaves up top and everything. So that's how that painting turned out. And if you notice on the tree stumps, the branches or trunks themselves, you'll see there's red in there. I got some blue in there. I got yellow in some places. And I just, the rough edges are the peeling bark off the birch tree. I love painting birch trees because they're very forgiving and you can get away with a lot. The next thing I want to talk to you about is maybe trying your hand at watercolor. And many people are afraid of working in watercolor because, you know, it's not forgiving, but it is all about the water. The more water you use, the less your paint covers. And the less water you use, the deeper your colors. So if you want a light painting, then you'll use more water. If you want less painting, you'll have a deeper color, richer pigments. So again, your supplies, you can go very low end and pick them up at the dollar store or a local craft store. You can get really high end stuff. And I mean, some paint sets are $100. But if you want to try it, you could try just with a couple of brushes, some watercolor paper, brushes, paints, and you need a bucket of water or a dish of water, a bowl of water, 2 of them. And in watercolor, you wash your brush between colors. So it's clean water, dirty water. So you wash your brush in dirty water and then you dip it in clean water and then pick up your paint and go from there. And of course, you always need paper towels. So the paper that I use is, I've always gone to one kind because it was the first one that I was introduced to, and it's Arches. It's called Arches, and it's 140-pound cold press. And that's just the way, the style and the method of how it's prepared and the brand. So I order that from this, or I pick it up at a local store. But if you don't want to buy big sheets of watercolor paper, and then you can buy one that's prepackaged in a book, and then you just use one page at a time. The other is that if you do get a big sheet of watercolor paper, you can cut it up into smaller pieces and make smaller paintings. So you can go, the full sheet is almost 3 feet by 2 feet, something like that. So out of that, you can get maybe a dozen smaller paintings. You just cut it up, your paper up into smaller pieces. One thing about it though, is if you're going to cut your paper, then you want to pay attention to what that would look like framed. If it's too small, then you won't be able to get a mat on it. And if it's too big, then you're going to lose part of your painting under the mat. So you have to play around with that. And I have a cheat sheet that I use with that so that I don't go over or under on my sizes. The other piece of it is that watercolor paintings have to be framed, and acrylic paintings are sealed with a spray varnish or a varnish coat so that they're UV resistant, or the elements don't destroy the painting. So under watercolor, it's expensive to frame them, but I think that you can pick up small frames and frame them yourself and put in mats and things like that. So you don't have to take it to a professional framer, especially if you're just starting out. And I can tell you, I have a suitcase under my bed of ones that I painted that I've never ever framed because they weren't that good. Anyways, but you can keep going until you do get good. And classes everywhere. There's classes everywhere for these things. So if you want, so the things with watercolor is that you can do the same techniques that we talked about in acrylic, that you can use the same techniques with watercolor. Again, you can use the tape, and you can put as many trees in there as you want. You can paint the background and then put a hint of leaves or branches and colors and everything. So it's the same method. However, when you lay down the watercolor paper or paint on the white paper, it stains it. You can't really cover it up. So if you're coloring outside the lines, that's your line. You're not going to be able to make many corrections. There are ways, but it's very difficult. And I usually tear my paper when I do that. So I don't make corrections. I just modify my painting. The other is that with acrylics, you can paint over your mistakes. With watercolor, you just make it into a happy accident and keep on going. So those are the two types of things. And that's why people find watercolors intimidating, is because they think, oh, if I made a mistake, oh, I don't like that piece or whatever. You can change the layout of your painting. You can cut your painting into a smaller size. You can pick the best piece of it that you like and make that your painting. When you're doing the paintings, with paintings, you can decide if you want to work in acrylics or watercolor and oils. Oils are a different thing as well, but they're very similar to acrylics. They just dry differently and they show differently. The preparation is still the same: canvas, gesso, paint. You can sketch on your canvas to lay your format and your design out, and then paint it from there. But principles are pretty similar. Now, when you want to explore watercolors, this one here is a beginner class, and it is like a lake scene, a beach scene. There's all kinds of techniques in here. We've got mist that is a lifting off, and then you've got scraping on the rocks, and you've got spatter on the sand. And you use whatever colors you feel that should belong into your painting. And as long as you're marking your horizon lines and they're relatively straight, you can put anything you want to in a watercolor. You can make that horizon line high or low. And you can make the rocks go above the water line, the horizon line. You can make your rocks pink, blue, green, orange, blue. I use a lot of purple in mine because I like the shadowy look effect of it. And yeah, so this was my oops, there we are. This was my misty thing, and if you can see behind me, it's hanging on the wall. I can't part with it. So there you go. So I just sat down and decided I wanted to be a scene on my wall, so that's what I got. So then, and you can get beginner classes talking to throughout the city, and you just find one. When I started with watercolors, I needed to find a hobby because I was very stressed and I didn't have anything other than work in my life. And so my doctor recommended that I get a hobby. Well, I thought, so what would I like to do? What hobby, what will engage me and everything. So I decided I wanted to paint. And that year for Christmas, my husband got me work classes through Julia Conlon, and it's watercolor. So no matter how long ago it's been 20 some years, when I want to paint watercolors. I can do acrylics, but I really enjoy the way watercolors comes out for me. And that just is my automatically go-to. When I travel, I can take watercolors with me. They don't take up much room. I usually have a paint set and some paper tucked away somewhere. So that's watercolors for me is my first go-to. Then acrylics, and I'm exploring oils as we speak. So you can figure out what works for you and go that way. But I suggest that if you're interested in painting, then find a class that has all the supplies included. And that way you're not investing. You walk into a class and they give you the class and they supply everything. It may be a little bit more money, but you are not left with a bunch of supplies that you'll never ever use again. So that's what they recommend. And then when you get into it, you can let your imagination soar. This one painting here is called Magical Forest. I wanted something really bold and all my favorite colors in it. And so I go back to painting watercolors. I always go to trees and forests for some reason. I like to be out in the woods. And this one here is using resist. So I painted the trees with a resist so that the paint wouldn't go on them. I didn't tape anything out. I used resist. It's a rubberized compound you paint on, and the paint won't adhere to that section because it can't get there. And then when you paint everything else, and then when that paint is all dry, usually I'd leave it overnight. The next day you take and remove that rubber from the resist from the painting, and then you paint the trees in that what you had painted. And you can do all kinds of techniques. You can scratch, you can groove it, and the paint will run where you've dented the paper. So this is again, you can the bottom of this was using a knife to move the paint around, scraping it around. This is a resist and on the trees, and then the rest is called wet on wet. Wet on wet is you wet the paper and then you just drop paint onto it and let it flow and let it dry where it wants to. There's a lot of terms that you'll hear. So you can dry brush, which is working on dry paper, and there's wet on wet, which is working on wet paper. And then you can use different tools to make marks so that the paint will flow into those marks, things like that. But for a beginning workshop, they will cover the basics, and a lot of that will be basics. So yeah. So anyways, that's the watercolor section. Now, for those of you who aren't interested in watercolors or painting, or don't feel that you have any calling in that direction, you can try sewing. You can pick up a mini quilt kit. This one here was a Valentine mini quilt patch system. I am hosting a workshop with seniors, and this was one of the projects. These kits were complete. Each one in the class got one, and this is our Valentine's project, and we're working on them now together as a group. So if the whole thing about sewing is that to get your sewing machine out after 10 years in storage, it may not be working great, but you can get it, try and get it working. And so if you have one, all you really need for quilting and for doing projects like this is a straight stitch. You don't need a fancy $4,000 sewing machine. A straight stitch will do. You don't even need zigzag. So the first section of this workshop for this Valentine project is to make the scrappy heart and use Wonder Under adhesive. Well, I never heard tell of Wonder Under. I used to sew clothes quite a bit, but this Wonder Under is like an interface that is sticky, and you iron it on. It's double-sided, so when you iron it on, it adheres to your material, and then you let it cool, and then the paper side of it, which you've been ironing on, it will remove and leaves you a rubber film. So whatever you're laying this over, then it will adhere to that as well. So the first thing we did was take 4 squares from our kit and sew them together, and they are the scrappy hearts. And then the next thing we did is we did our scrappy hearts. So we laid them on the fabric and ironed them on, and then once we cut around them. So now we have the hearts that are in like 4 different pieces, but all multi-design. These are scrappy because they're all made out of scraps. And so then you got to the backer piece, and we ironed it into quarters so that this heart point here would match up on a quarter. On this would match up. Oops, go back. And then the sides would match up with the side sewing seams. So this centered the heart on each block. And then once we did that, we had to sew them onto the white material, and it's called raw edge applique. We didn't turn it under. because of the backing on it, it won't fray. So we sewed a fine line, a really skinny line of sewing that heart on. You could zigzag it on, you could put 2 rows of stitching around, or as long as it's solid on that block, you're not going to be washing this product very much anyway, so it shouldn't fray or anything else, but you can zigzag it on and it'll last for years. So then we have our hearts all mounted on those centerpieces. The next thing is to make our half triangle squares. There's this nifty little ruler that you can use, and the ruler is 3 pieces. So it's a 1/2 inch wide, and there's a line that runs through the middle of it. So we put this ruler on the diagonal of 2 of your lightest square, and you draw it so that you have 2 lines, and then you'll have a stitch line, a cutting line. So your lines on either side of the ruler are your stitch lines, and then you have a cutting line. So that is how it looks there. And then you take your rotary cutter and a ruler and you cut them apart. And now you have 2 triangles that are sewn together, light color and a dark color. And these are what they look like when they're opened up and ironed. So that's assembling this block. You have your heart in the middle, mounted on your white back, and then you put your squares and your half triangles around to make the quilt block. And you're going to do this 4 times and put it together, and it becomes your entire package. So that is just, there's a lot of decisions that you're making. Do I like this pink? Do I like that next to this? And back and forth, back and forth. But the more if you lay it out and move it around, you'll be happier with the layout. Like I don't like this pattern next to that pattern and things like that. So I always lay it out first and see if I like it. And then if I like it, I'm okay with that design. And then I will sew it together. And again, you're only using straight stitch on your machine and a 1/4 inch seam. Everything in quilting is 100% cotton. Your material is cotton, your thread is cotton. And so when you're sewing, everything has to be 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. And there's very little that happens that isn't on sewing on a 1/4 inch when it comes to quilting. So these are the modern tools of the trade. I know years ago these were not available. So you have this, it's a self-healing cutting board. It's kind of like a rubberized thing. It's got grid marks on it that are marked off on the inch and then sometimes on the 1/2 inch. And you cut all your fabric and everything on that using the rotary cutter. The rotary cutter is actually a razor blade on a wheel, and it will cut through multiple layers of a fabric at once. So you get 3 or 4 pieces cut out instead of just 1. The rulers come in all kinds of sizes and shapes. You have long ones, short ones, and square ones, round ones, curved ones, triangle ones. So these are the modern tools. And of course you need your thread snippers and your fabric cutter scissors. Both of these are available in like Quilt Fabric, Michael's, any shop. I got a lot of my supplies this year at DNR Vacuum over on Lozon. They do sewing machines and vacuums, and they have a whole room that's full of quilt supplies. I'm quite happy with that. Then we have a modern quilt rack. I know probably many of you remember quilt racks that were big, wooden, cumbersome, filled the room. Today's modern quilt rack is made out of ABS plastic. It weighs about 15 or 10 pounds. You can snap a quilt into it, straighten it out, and 2 people can set a quilt on either side of that. And so it's easy to put away. You just disassemble it and put it in a bag kind of thing. And then when you want to quilt, it's, as you can see by the size of the chair, it's about the size of 2 chairs. So, I mean, it'll fit in a little corner of your dining room or your living room or your bedroom, depending on what space you find that you can carve out for you for quilting, if you want to do hand quilting. Most people in our realm right now don't have that kind of time. So they use long arm quilting. So they send it out and have the thing quilted by machine. And really, hand quilting is a traditional way of quilting, but machine quilting is fully acceptable. Quilts seem to be denser, they seem to last a bit longer, and you know, they don't come apart. So the machine does a better job than hand quilting, but hand quilting is the traditional method. So if you're a purist, you will go for hand quilting, and that's what this rack can help you do. I wanted to show you that quilting is easy as sewing a straight line. This is called a log cabin quilt, and the log cabin quilt is a traditional pattern, and this one is in black and white, and you can see that the red center is a traditional thing. It's called the hearth of the home, and the squares that go around it are the log cabin. So there's variations and variations and variations of this pattern. It's a old pattern, and people put it together a lot of different ways, and how you lay the blocks out in the quilt can vary. It can be a zigzag, it can be a wave, it could be all kinds of different ways. You can make it into a square depending on how you lay the blocks together and fasten them together. But the fundamental of the block is strips of material, varying lengths. So you would have two the same, two the same, two the same, two the same, and you keep going. So you have a light and a dark, light and a dark, light and a dark, same length. And you can decide how wide you want them depending on how narrow the block is. This one, I've got my template done. It's going to be about a 6 to 9 inch block, depending on if I add any more layers to the outside of it to make it bigger. 6 inch blocks, you're going to need hundreds of them. 9 inch blocks, you only need about 80 some. So it's a difference on how much work you want to put into it. And you are putting all of these pieces together in sequence, and they all have to be put together in picked up the same way, the same way, the same way, so that each block looks the same. So that's the log cabin quilt project, and it's as easy as sewing a straight line. Once you figure the pattern out and pick the material so that they're all gelling together and they look good together, then you can create that type of a quilt. This is the first quilt that I did last year. I haven't quilted in years. Went to this workshop and decided that I would do, this is called a double Irish chain quilt. I made it for my daughter-in-law. I was making it in green, but I found out that her room was pink, so I had to start over. This is a queen size, and it took me about 40 hours of sewing, and I sent it out to be quilted. So once I assembled it, I cut it and assembled it and sewed it. It was about 40 hours of sewing. Some days I would sew an hour, and other days I would sew for 6 hours. But off and on for over the course of a month, I put this quilt together, and then I sent it out in time for her birthday. So it was a nice surprise for her. She's very happy, loves it. So then, and again, this is simply straight stitch. You don't need anything other than the ruler, the rotary cutter, and some material. And the pattern is very easy. If you look at it, it's 9 in a row here, 9 patch. And then out here is another one that's a different blocks. So, but they're all done and starting with strips of fabric, and then you cut the fabric into squares, and then you sew the squares back together in a pattern. That's all it is. So it's very easy to, once you get it in, you know, in a sequence, when it's laid out on your table, then anyone can put these together. And yes, you do need a seam ripper, because yes, we all make mistakes. Old school. I'm sure many of you remember hand piecing a quilt, your grandmother, your mother, using templates. So they would cut out cardboard, and that would be their pattern. And then they would lay it on the material with a pencil and cut it out. And then they would cut it with a pair of scissors. And that would be that they would make multiple copies of this, and then they would sew them together by hand. So this is a template. I'm using plastic for my templates. This is going to be a hand piece project. And I'll give you the backstory behind that. So I made the template, I took a block apart, I made the template, and now I'm making new blocks because the quilt that I found had missing pieces. So this is an assembled block that using that template. So this is the little white piece, and then this is the colored piece, and you just put them together. They're all hand stitched. Every seam is curved and every seam is 1/4 inch. And so the way they're put together, and these are all pressed to one way. So the pressing of the seams all goes in a circular pattern so that when it's stitched in a circular pattern. Pressing in your iron, if you haven't used your iron in 10 years, if you're quilting, you're going to use your iron. And if it's too light or it leaks or it doesn't give you enough steam, you're going to go buy a new one because it's frustrating. And if your ironing board is all wobbly, you'll probably get a new one of those too. So this quilt pattern is called Orange Peel, and it is completely hand pieced. Oops. This one here is one that I found in like a bag of rags at a Goodwill store. And in the bag, I thought, that's really colorful, what that is. So I went and pulled it out, and it's a quilt top that was hand pieced, but there was 2 or 3 blocks that were incomplete on one edge. So I am now setting about to finish the edge, and then I will have it quilted. And it will be probably the size of a standard bed, like a double bed. It's not going to be big enough for a queen, but it will be a double bed size quilt. And it's old-fashioned, like ginghams, and the material is rather thin compared to material that we can buy today. So matching that white, I had to buy poplin, which is a different type of cotton. And I did manage to find this blue stripe material, but it's a little brighter than this blue stripe material. So I can rebuild some new blocks to finish off the edge of the quilt, and then this will be a done deal. But I am going to hand piece it. I can't say that I'm going to hand quilt it. It's like, I'm not crazy. But anyway, so that's that quilt project. So that's also on my table. I have a number that are in the works here. So for you who don't really want to do any quilting, you're not into sewing, or you don't have a sewing machine, and you like complicated projects, you might try to your hand at silk embroidery. This is a little, I'm going to say this cushion isn't any more than 10 inches all the way around. It's a silk or satin, and these are silk ribbons that have been pulled up through to create leaves and roses and flowers and things. It's called silk ribbon embroidery. There is special needles that you buy, and there's certain knots that you do. There's books on it. I find the work is totally beautiful, and in my spare time I'm going to try and master this. It's a challenge, but as soon as I get my quilt stuff. But this is one of the examples that I had, and I thought, you know what, silk embroidery is something that you would do if you weren't very mobile and you still had good eyesight and your hands worked well. You could try this if you're quite creative. I know a lot of people who spend a lot of time in chairs sitting watching TV, but their hands are not busy. So if your hands are busy, then you know, you're doing 2 things at once, and we do love to multitask. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is perhaps doing some stained glass. This is a sample of stained glass that my daughter made, and I have this. It is wired as well and with beads. So I think the basic stained glass course is given out locally, a beginner class. And then once you get the idea of the tools, the soldering, the foil that you go around the outside can either be in silver or copper. Then you add beads, you weld them together, you know, solder them together, and you have an ornament, a hanging ornament. The class that I took was not stained glass so much as fused glass. So we made hanging bird feeders, and they were all different colored glass, and put it into a kiln, and it melted. So the glass colors all fused together, making it multicolored, and it was a bowl. And so that's what we did in our fused glass class. And of course, I have that, and it's too precious to use. I only made one. So anyways, but the fused glass I found really nice. I have actually, I don't know if anyone can see it, but I have a window in my room and it's fused glass. I bought it at Art in the Park. It's in an old window frame, and it is poppies that are, the glass is all melted so that the poppies are laid against the white, and then the green grass and everything is all shaped out, and it's all melted together so that it becomes this beautiful piece of art, and the light shines through it so you can get the reflections and everything. This fused glass is very nice, and it's in an old frame, which is something that, old window frame. So I really like it. But anyways, it's in my upstairs. Works for me. The other thing is that if you don't want to do anything at all, and you just want to basically have some friends together, you can, if you like to entertain, you can do a luncheon. So the luncheon is, I do this once or twice a year. This one I did in the summertime. It was outside. And so you can host a Valentine themed luncheon. And so the first thing you got to do is decide what to serve. What do you want to do? What do you want to make it elaborate or not elaborate? And then invitation, who to invite, and then a decorate. I would use my best linen, my best china, everything, make it all schmancy and an experience for everyone who's attending. And then basically enjoy your friends, bring them in and have an afternoon lunch or brunch or a dinner. So that way, you do get that social aspect, but you're not doing anything other than entertaining and a luncheon. So I like going to luncheons. I think they're a blessing. So I try and do them a few times a year for people that I call my besties. The other is that if you don't want to do any of that, you're not a cook, maybe you don't want to decorate for anything, you can actually grab some Valentine cards. And my local dollar store has beautiful selection of cards, and they're not that expensive. And send Valentine cards to family and friends that you haven't seen in a while. I know my husband and I always send out Christmas cards, and this year we put a letter in them. Well, we got so many calls and returns and connections that people that we hadn't talked to in a long time, simply because we put a letter in with our Christmas card. It was more than a card. So that's what we did. But sending a Valentine card to someone that you're thinking of is a really nice gesture. And I think that, that'll go a long way in getting you through the season. So I want to thank everyone for joining me. And if there's any questions or you have any information that you want, you can just let me know.